of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And call the meeting to order. Minutes, resolution 23-191 to accept the minutes of September 6, 2023.
So, second?
Moved and second, discussion?
Is this September 6th? Have I got the wrong minutes?
I don't know what minutes you have.
That was the last meeting.
The last meeting is September 6th?
Should it say Kingsbury Plantation instead of Highland Plantation?
In respect to,
The minutes of September 6th?
no, but what's?
Which section?
It is section,
In what's the context? Because Kingsbury is part of the,
says this dispute with Highland Plantation for non-payment of salt shed.
yeah, it should be Kingsbury.
Kingsbury, so I
Yes, you're
move
right.
to correct the minutes of that.
All right, well, there's our correction.
Okay, spot check.
Anything else? Any other discussion? Accept the minutes as corrected? All in favor? Huh?
Recuse myself, wasn't here.
You weren't there, okay, one abstention. And public hearing, none, public comment, to allow the members of the public to comment or reserve time to speak on an upcoming agenda item. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak or reserve time? Okay, seeing none. Workshop, discuss engagement with New England Energy Connect for the creation of a tax increment district in the unorganized territory.
So, Mr. Chair, the representatives that are going to speak to that are still en route. And so Christian's out front waiting for them. Might I suggest we go to workshop 2?
That'll be perfect.
And
We
so,
can do that while we wait.
All right.
No thing on that. Workshop number 2 is to discuss application process for a community benefit program matching grants.
so you've had this application before you once before, and I referred you to the first page where I have made some edits. What I did was I included some language in the first paragraph that's specifically from the community benefit agreement, which says that these dollars need to contribute to the well-being of the county. So it kind of separates it from the UT TIF as a county-wide benefit funds. At the bottom part of the third paragraph, I added the language to say, this program does not restrict the county commissioners from allocating CBA funds to benefit other projects as they deem to be in the best interest of the county. So it doesn't restrict all of the CBA's monies to this grant program. There's a certain portion that you can allocate to that or special projects as you see fit. We've talked about a special committee, and I've reached out to the members of the budget committee, which has representation throughout all 5 districts. And so far, I've gotten a little bit of feedback from people who may be interested in serving on a review committee specifically to this grant program. So once again, you kind of have that differentiation between the UT TIF, which has its own TIF committee, and this program, the matching grants program. So I think those are some of the key elements. As you see, there is a very, very simple application process, and that is by design to keep it as simple as possible, and to do a points-based series of 4 questions that can be reviewed. So I'll take any questions and see if the commissioners are interested in moving forward with this.
Jim, is this grant process going to be quarterly, or is it going to be?
We discussed this at the previous meeting. And initially, I thought of doing it once a year, but the consensus of the group was to do it twice a year, to kind of align it with different budgets. Different organizations will have different budgets and seasons. And so as you see in this example before you, I would recommend, if you were to go forward with this, to have an open enrollment period from the 1st of October through mid-November, and then have applications reviewed in November, then brought to you for the first meeting in December, to December.
Do we need, I mean, I'm sure the guy with the committee issued. We need to vote on what this committee looks like, so we should, the proposal says there shall be a committee, it shall have X amount of members on it, 2 from the community, 2 from the municipalities, 1 officio, 1 of us, you, I don't know, but we ought to have something in writing of what this, and I personally, I think it's a good idea to get some community members too, not just municipal officers, from, and I'm sure we all have ideas of good candidates for that, so.
So I was thinking about drafting that language and
Yeah.
maybe bringing you some potential appointees to that committee at the next meeting.
Yeah, I don't know what a good number would be, it doesn't want to
I was
be,
thinking 5. 5 engaged people.
yeah,
You can have 13, but you'd only get 5 engaged people.
yeah. 5 to 7, an odd number.
We'll call it 6.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, I'm in favor, and
Okay.
Quick question on the 50/50 grant match. Is that just exclusively to businesses or all other entities that might be applying for?
So I would keep the process the same, whether it was a nonprofit. And one of the things you can look at there is there are nonprofits that have access to other grant funds. And there's nothing in the writing here that would say that one grant can't be a match for the other.
Okay.
I'll give you an example for like a food cupboard. A food cupboard can receive money from Good Shepherd, and that could be a match towards the project.
Guess my question would be then, if we're gonna have a committee, and then of course we as the commissioners, should we have the ability to adjust that 50/50 down to decrease in situations where the idea and the money's going towards the project are really gonna be beneficial to the county, but the matching up to that percent is not gonna be there?
Yep. I think you could probably put it at your discretion to waive or adjust the match.
That's what I thought.
that's good.
As long as and as you know, every time you do something like this, you have to be careful of the precedent you set and that sort of thing.
Any further discussion?
One more thing. So, Tim, in the clawback of this, the 75%, and how is that, how do we enforce that sort of thing?
I chuckle at that because that was recommended by my previous employers and at the town of Madison, because there had been some frustration with giving businesses grants, and then that business went out of business
Right.
shortly thereafter. Basically, what you're trying to enforce here, or what you're trying to encourage, is that the people realize, okay, we're not going to look at fly-by-night type operations. They sign and they agree to the terms on the first page. But then again, just like everything else, it's going to be catch as catch can if you're able to recoup some of that money.
We're trying to scare them in the beginning,
That's my intention.
Okay, yeah.
and jump off the bridge.
So there's no actual mechanism that,
There's not a mechanism in place, and there's far too many attorneys in the room right now for me to get into this. So.
good idea. Good idea.
Senator Collections Bureau, there's some collections lawyers would be glad to take some of that action.
Anything else? All set to go back to number 1? Gentlemen, number 1. Discuss engagement with New England Energy Connect for a creation of a tax increment district in the unorganized territory.
So at the previous commissioners' meeting, in Christian's report, he made a comment that the time is upon us to start investigating the opportunity of creating a tax increment financing district along the areas impacted by the corridor, CMP's corridor. And so we did some work looking into who may have the expertise to help the county through this and who may be available that's not already somehow connected to this project. This project has really handcuffed a lot of the attorneys in the state of Maine in one form or another. But our good friends at Eaton Peabody do have some availability and expertise. And so I'm going to turn it over to John and Andy from Eaton Peabody to kind of explain what they would help us with if we wanted to pursue this.
Is it okay to take a chair over there from here?
Certainly.
Great. My name's Andy.
Yes, I'd like to.
So So I just wanted to kick us off because I was the reason we were slightly delayed. And so I wanted to take the responsibility and not put that on John's shoulders. My name's Andy Hamilton. I'm an attorney at Peabody. My practice started in 1984. I've been pleased to help communities across the state that are working on mill redevelopment. Folks like Lincoln, Bingham, Millinocket, and Ashland, and helping communities get their feet back on it. Part of what happens with redevelopment of sites is tax increment financing, whether it be in the direction of credit enhancement agreements that help the credit of the company seeking to redevelop a site, or infrastructure tips. And sometimes it's a mix of the two, sometimes it's pure infrastructure or pure credit enhancement. John and I have also worked alongside a gentleman named Tim Woodcock in our firm for an organization that is providing the supply of electricity to Maine, and that's Hydro-Quebec. And so we were asked by Christian and Tim to look into whether we could clear the conflict, something I know John's well familiar with. And so we spoke with our colleagues at Hydro-Quebec. They were fine with it because they understood that the company, Nessic or Avangrid, was not really looking to enhance its credit. It was looking to provide the opportunity for the tax increment to flow to the communities, specifically in the UT and the organized towns that are along the route in Somerset County. So I said, Christian, we needed a few weeks. I've got to check in with council for Nessic. I did that and got an email back from Jerry Rozier of Pure Sapling saying Avangrid has no objection to EPP. I come from a firm that is very focused on community and helping both regions and communities thrive. And I think the TIF is a good way to do that. But without further ado, I'd have John walk you through his approach to TIF practice, because in the recent era, he's done more of it than I have. I've done it historically, he's done it more recently. And including an interesting wind energy project in Mercer County where he worked with both the county administrator and the county commissioners. So, John, you.
Yeah, so thank you, number one, for the opportunity just to kind of introduce myself, obviously hear from Andy as well. I haven't been practicing for as long as Andy, but I think I've been going at it for about 15 years now. So a big section of my practice is doing tax increment financing, anywhere from the smaller projects to the larger projects, like the wind projects. Could be amendments. I was involved in the Dragon Cement one, some of the natural gas-fired plants. There's one in VZ. So they're really vary across the board. You can really structure them one way or the other. As Andy mentioned, a lot of TIFs do have credit enhancement agreements involved with it. Essentially, it's a property tax reimbursement or portion thereof to the taxpayer. Not all of them do. We call them more pure TIFs. You can still do a TIF without a CEA, and that is, in its core, really an economic development perspective when it comes to the officers. Here's obviously the county commissioners. A TIF doesn't make sense in every single instance. It's not a blanket approach. At least that's how I approach it. Say, well, it's something that I would always say investigate, get more information on what it would look like to potentially do a TIF specific to a project or an area, depending on what you're looking at. You can make the decision from there. I wouldn't submit that you just say, no, we should never do that, or yes, we should always do that. You should really take a look at it first. And when you have a large project that has the potential to really generate new taxable value, it's worth taking a look at, I would say. And it's really upfront. You want to make sure you could meet the so-called statutory thresholds under the TIF statute. You would do, in my opinion, some preliminary financial projections, start to see what that looks like, what's it look like with a TIF, what's it look like without a TIF? Obviously, you're making some assumptions in that respect. And also thinking about, if you did do a TIF, what would be some of the potential project or project areas here the county might be interested in doing. One of the benefits, I would say, when you don't have a credit enhancement agreement involved, is you really do have a wide degree of flexibility in how much you would, we call it, capture in a TIF. It's not an all or nothing proposition. It's not 0% or 100% or 50% all the time. You can structure it so year by year, you can actually vary that to tailor it to your specific budget or projects or what you may be anticipating in the near or longer term. So particularly if you've got a large project without a corresponding credit enhancement agreement, I'd say it's always worth looking at, because you may be in a year say, well, we don't want to capture 100%, we want to capture 10% to have as TIF revenues for whatever budgetary purposes, and that way you can send the rest to your general fund. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. And of course, the first thing I'd always say to folks is look at your existing budget to see what's the lowest hanging fruit, because you may already be spending dollars on projects or programs that might otherwise be eligible for TIF revenues. That's obviously the biggest bang for your buck. And the reason because of that is you're essentially keeping 100% of that dollar, I say locally, here it's countywide, as opposed to it being diluted, in essence, based on all the various state formulas. It's different for the county than it is for a municipality, but you're still getting kind of a discount on that new dollar that you may have for tax revenue. So a lot of it is financial, a lot of it is policy-wise as well, looking at what you're interested in and potentially doing for economic development activities. TIF revenues sound great, but obviously you can only utilize them for eligible projects. It's not everything across the board, so you have to take that into consideration. From a process or kind of phase standpoint, I always go, that's kind of the initial, do your initial due diligence, conceptually, make sure it works, what the numbers tend to show. If you want to keep going, then you would put together essentially an application, a draft application, that you have to have a public hearing on that has to be noticed. Obviously, the commissioners are the approval authority. If you approve that, it then gets submitted to DECD. They're the state agency that reviews it. The review process can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days. Hopefully it's an approval, and then you're done, and then you're off to the races. But again, I'm grossly distilling that to kind of simplified steps, but that really in essence is what it is. And if you decide, well, we don't want to do one based on kind of a initial due diligence, then you just don't do it. But I still would argue, particularly for a large project, it presents the opportunity to keep more dollars, I'd say, in Somerset County. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but at least look at that as a potential. That's kind of the approach I like to take with a client, is say, let's take a look at this, whether it would be a TIF or no TIF or somewhere in between. That way you have the information, you can make that informed decision on which direction you want to go. If you do want to proceed, then you go through the formal steps to adopt a TIF, and then you go through that process with the state. And if for some reason down the road, if you went through that process, you wanted to terminate it, then you terminate it. It's much easier to terminate, again, if you don't have that contractual obligation that would be tied to a credit enhancement agreement. So, it's really a lot of flexibility that, again, arguably, I would say you should definitely take a look at it, at least at the initial stage, to see if that might make sense for Somerset County. From the county commissioner's perspective in your jurisdiction. I know you've been through this before.
Three of us have. And I'm one of the three, and I'm kind of a klutz and stuff, so
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
By all means.
Well, the credit enhancement, that's when the money goes back to the developer company.
Taxpayer,
whatever.
correct.
And in this particular, when we're talking about the corridor there, that's not going to be in play, you don't know?
That's our best understanding.
That's our understanding.
And the last TIF we had was the turbines,
Yes.
and we had this community benefit thing. Is that specific to wind power development?
It
I don't
is.
think, that's not available for the corridor?
What you'll find in the grid-scale wind energy projects is there's a statute that says, at a minimum, there must be benefit of $4,000 per turbine as a host community benefit. That's where those community benefits stem from.
Because you heard earlier, we're always discussing how
Correct.
we should spend that money, which is kind of free money. So, but that's not going to be in play.
It isn't. I would say, it certainly is, think of it as part of the available resources, part of your programmatic material or that you have as a county, so I wouldn't look at it in a vacuum, but you certainly, it's conceivable that you might have a project, a program that is funded not only from community benefit dollars, but also potentially from TIF revenue dollars.
Right.
That's certainly a potential. Community benefit dollars are nice because you essentially can, unless you're otherwise restricted in the document, they're really there for any public purpose.
Right, whereas what we're talking about with this new project would be theoretically limited to the district and its environs, more or less.
In essence, it would be, they call them 3 tiers, not to get too much detail, but a TIF district is a defined geographical area.
Yeah.
So there's certain projects you can do in that defined area. You can also have projects outside that area that have some rational relationship
Right.
to what's going on in the district. And you can also have what they call community-wide. You don't have to have that rational basis test, it's just community-wide. An example would be some of what you're talking about. You can have revolving loan or grant programs or deal with, environmental projects. Those are ones that are like community-wide. So it varies depending upon which tier an eligible project may fall within. And where that gets set forth is what we call a development program. Think of it as it's similar to a budget, but kind of a aspirational budget, where you say, well, here's a list of the types of projects, and sometimes it's quite broad, but sometimes specific. Here's the ones that we want to do that are consistent with the TIF statute. And then right next to it is, what's our, estimate? How much money do we think we might spend? And I'd always aim high, because you can always spend less, but if you have to spend more, you have to go do a TIF amendment. But always keep it within reason. So it's kind of like, it's very much a visionary budget, if you will. And whatever amount you have in that budget, it has to meet or exceed what you're projecting to capture as TIF revenues throughout the time period. You can go up to 30 years, you can do less if you like, but you can think of it as potentially a 30-year, planning long-term process that you can obviously change along the way, but that's kind of the outlook that you would look at.
I would add that I think what's really interesting about this project is the 2021 increment is not available because you've got to make application for the prior year. I think the deadline, John, for 2022 is February of next year.
Yeah, so what Andy's talking about is when you're doing a tax increment financing district, and again, it's a tax increment, that's where the name comes from. So think of it as a basis or a baseline or original assessed value. So you take the assessed value of a property, then something happens, there's improvements made, and it goes up. The way the statute works is your baseline, your basis, is the assessed value of the preceding tax year. So the preceding tax year right now would be as of April 1st, 2022. So anything before that, you can't count. So right now, if we wanted to use April 1st of 2022 as the basis, we have until essentially next February. So that would be the time frame if you wanted to lock in, for lack of a better phrase, what the assessed value is or a baseline. If you don't do it by then and the value goes up, then you're going to have to go back to April 1st, 2023. And if you follow where I'm going on that. The baseline is going to go up, and at some point, if you wait too long, there'll be no increment because the improvements have already been made.
And a lot of them have been made.
Correct.
A lot of the corridors, I mean, they haven't strung the wires up in many places, but they've done a lot of work.
Yeah, there's a variety depending on which of the 5 segments you're in, but you're absolutely right, John. In some places in Somerset County, there's been some clearing, placement of poles, some places no poles, definitely no wires, as you suggest. We think that, it may have made sense to think about this about a year ago, but we are where we are.
Yeah.
And I think nobody should feel bad about that. With this project, it's hard to have a rear view mirror that's perfect, let alone a front windshield. So I don't think anybody needs to feel bad about that 2021 increment. Where you need to understand, there is, you talk about community benefits. Usually with a project, you need both the community benefits and the TIF to add up to something that's meaningful. With this project, the TIF alone, the increment's going to be meaningful. And I don't want to provide numbers because then I'd set expectations and baselines. And I'd rather do it once we have a complete understanding of how, particularly in the UT, the Maine Revenue Services sees it, because the Maine Revenue Service is very protective of the assessed value. So we need to be cautious as to what it looks like, but it is a big number from 2022 forward. And the reason for that is, for those of you who follow the papers, I actually was fascinated by a 6-day jury trial in Portland. And until that jury trial concluded successfully for the project, folks didn't know. So now that we know, it's good timing. As John said, February 2024 is the deadline. You got several months of work to get there. And so we thought it made sense, in part because Christian and Tim thought it made sense, but also because John put before us in our last staff discussion the fact that February 2024 is going to be the deadline to capture the 2022 income. And so we didn't want to dilly-dally. We also didn't want to be presumptuous. We brought draft engagement letters for your review and comment. We'll pass those out at the end of this discussion, but we really didn't want to tear dawdle with getting engaged and having the opportunity for you to see firsthand in terms of the reports that will be provided to the commissioners, how this TIF process gets formulated. And it's very much going to involve collaborative work with the county administrator, similar to what you had from experience in Aroostook County. You might speak to that briefly.
Yeah, I mean, counties are different, but I mean, again, when you're collecting information on a TIF, I would say at a numbers level, basically you're working with an Excel spreadsheet and you're looking at the county budget. And it's a combination of what are you doing right now that might otherwise be an eligible TIF project? And how does that look through the lens of what you might have or could have as TIF revenues here from a NESIC project? And the other side of that would be, are there other economic development activities that would be eligible under the TIF statute that you might want to do, and have that truly as a tool in your toolbox if you wanted to capture that amount in a particular year and correspondingly appropriate it as part of your budget process to spend on that amount. And again, I would say, I don't want to be too redundant here, but without a credit enhancement agreement, you have a lot of potential flexibility in how much you would capture in a TIF district year by year by year, which means you can essentially allocate to some degree what you would send to your general fund, using that term loosely, versus what you might capture for TIF revenues in a particular year based on the budgetary needs of the county as you're reviewing it, but also looking into the future. It's really it's really quite flexible. And if you found it wasn't working for you for whatever reason, then you can just stop doing it and terminate it. But if you don't have it established because of that baseline, that window will eventually close. You can't go back in time. There's no time machine you can get into unless they amend the statute.
Quick question, John. So earlier on, you were talking about, you referred to large projects multiple times. in your definition, I don't understand what your definition is of large. This particular project, is it large, is it very large, is it?
It's large in terms of dollars, yes.
And that's what comprises of something being large or not, is you're gauging it by dollars.
I would always say it depends. Like, a lot of times you're looking at what's the capital expenditure that a particular project is estimating. That's not the end all. Of course, sometimes you can have other considerations, job creation. I think everyone's fairly aware, we were involved with New Balance. There's a lot of jobs coming along with that project. Some other projects, wind projects, typically don't have a lot of job creation. A lot for construction, but not for O&M, operation and maintenance. But still a lot of CapEx, as they would say, involved with that. Capital, the higher CapEx has a tendency to be translated to higher taxable value. It's not dollar for dollar by any means, but, you can think of, the wind projects are quite high. Take the megawatt capacity and times it by 2 million. That's probably what you've seen. You can have a, 40 megawatt project, $80 million is not unheard of. Now, there's different methodology on how those get assessed amongst the assessing authorities, not to get into that. But those would be large projects, but it also could be an industrial facility, but also could be a smaller project. Might be someone that's putting in a small restaurant, or they're looking to do a grocery store. The Maine is quite varied, as we all know, and most of Maine is small business, but there's also larger industry here as well. Not as much as we used to have, but there still is some of those projects out there. The considerations and process are really not all that different. It's just the dollars are different, and correspondingly what you might be able to do with that. So it's kind of a scope and scale.
So large.
Yeah, large. Well, I think you've seen in the paper, the project, they're estimated at $1 billion is what it would cost. Now,
Again, being new to this, I wouldn't know if 1 billion is large, or is it small?
That's big.
So large.
That's big for Maine standards.
Yep, pretty darn large. And I think that means it's gonna be worthwhile for.
So it's actually pretty darn large.
Yeah, there you go.
Pretty darn large.
It's-
Gotcha.
It's going to be helpful to both the UT communities and the organized towns that are within the core that can capture that value. I'd ask Tim as to whether the shelter value is worth taking a moment to discuss and how that value gets sheltered, or is that less of a consideration today?
I think that's probably a little bit beyond the.
Down the road, yeah, all right.
Just to the Commissioner's question, Backyard Farms was what we considered a pretty big TIF, and that captured about $50 million worth of valuation. So this probably is bigger than that.
So the message is, we got to get going on this if we want to do it, because we don't want to have them increase, we don't want the value going up before we TIF it, because then.
Correct, sir.
Correct.
Okay.
You're gonna lose a full year of construction improvements
Yes.
made on that one. And that could be, once they get cranking, they've still got some discussions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that they're engaging. But once they get cranking again, it should be soon, it doesn't take too long. Those crews are very effective and very efficient at getting the poles in the air and getting the wires on the poles, so. We think this is the year to capture.
The other thing that's just from a logistical application standpoint is, so long as you do it before April 1st of a particular year, you can get essentially what's called an extension to file with DECD, but you have to submit that officially. So if for some reason, although there's lots of time between now and February, you wanted to still be able to reach back to that baseline value, you can do that. But that's the time window you're essentially looking at. It's a fair amount of time, but, it's just like anything. Time goes by faster than we all expect. There's so much to do. So it's, I would say between now and February, whether you engage us or not, you should look at this and make a decision.
if we, just ballpark stuff, if we did engage you, I assume we'd be getting these various stages where we have to decide, do we want to proceed, how do we want, you'll be educating
Oh, yeah.
us and move along fairly rapidly and openly.
The largest, I would put it this way, the heaviest lift, if I had to describe it that way, is actually packaging together all the details of an application and then going and doing a public hearing. Usually, I always suggest doing at least two, kind of a informational meeting prior to the actual official public hearing, just so you're two-stepping it at least. Up front, when you're doing, I'll call them the preliminary, let's sketch this out, make sure there's no fatal flaws or red flags or whatever it may be. That's not as much of an effort as putting together the full application materials. So I always call phase one would be kind of the preliminary considerations. Is there something there that might cause you to decide, no, we're not going to do it? Do that first. If there's no fatal flaw, no huge red flags, then, okay, let's proceed. Well, to proceed from there is, all right, let's put together the draft application. That's the heaviest lift. And then you go through the process. Officially, all you need to do is have a public hearing. You publish it in the newspaper at least 10 days in advance, have your public hearing. After the public hearing the same day, you can vote to approve it if you so wish. And then you simply finalize the application with extra materials, and the extra materials are simply minutes from the meeting, a record of your vote approving the application. That all goes into DECD. It's the same draft application that was prepared before. Inevitably, DECD will have questions or ask for clarifications on the application. That's very normal. But everything, again, really stems from that second phase. That's the heavy lift, for lack of a better phrase, to put it all together.
Is that when we establish the geographical scope of the
Correct.
district and?
Yep, you want a map, where it's going to be. You'll need to have your financial projections. What do we think the taxable value will be? What are we projecting, what we will capture? What's the mill rate going to be, or the tax rate going to be going forward? They're all, you're making assumptions, of course. You're using your best judgment and information to make those. You package that all together. You're going to want to have your so-called development program. Think about that as the project list. What are the eligible types of projects that you would potentially fund from TIF revenues if you had in your program? Those are really the big components of it. And then you add in the details that the state will be looking for. The application is not terrible. It's actually a form-based now. You can choose to use the form. It's not as user-friendly as I would expect, just from a Word file, but it's still nonetheless pretty good. But we just go through and we populate it with the information. Obviously, it's specific to what the county wants. But again, once that's ready, that's what you want on file. So for a public hearing perspective, if any interested person that wanted to show up at the public hearing wanted to review the draft application, well, there it is. They come in and they look at it. You really should not have a public hearing unless you have a draft application put together with all the components that would be available. Obviously, there's a few that need to come after the public hearing, like minutes of the public hearing and evidence of your vote. I mean, that's just common sense. But yeah, there's essentially those four phases, and I think I articulated them in the draft letter. Basically upfront, preliminary analysis, preliminary review. Does this make sense? Kind of a thumbnail sketch standpoint. If so, proceed to put together the draft application. If you're still happy with the draft application, schedule that public hearing. Again, I would say have an info meeting first, which is not required, but I'd still do it, and then have a public hearing after that. And then that same evening, or if you wanted to do it some other day, you as the commissioners would decide whether or not you want to advance it. Assume that you said yes, we would put on those final touches, submit it to DECD, and then DECD would review it, ask questions, clarifications, and we would obviously hope for an approval. through that process. And then you're done.
So there are a couple moving parts. One, you said the credit enhancement, we don't know if that's something that's going to come into play or not.
Our best understanding is that it will not come into play.
Okay, so we can, do we have to explore that avenue to any extent?
No.
I don't think so, that'll just be a process of confirmation as the process goes forward. But
And
we're pretty sure.
the other thing is how the taxing authority of the unorganized territories play into the TIF.
They certainly have a role. So by way of example, so you're going to have an assessor's certificate. That really harkens back to, I keep calling it the baseline, the original assessed value. And I would always say, I'll call it the assessor, they have a role in trying to figure out, what do we think the taxable value will be going forward? That's a healthy conversation to have. Again, there are going to be projections, because you never absolutely know until something is actually built and then it is actually assessed.
Right.
But again,
And Dave can help us with that. You have a,
I was just pointing out what you were talking, I'm not really sure I understood, but we don't put values on this property, it's done by the state.
I know.
Okay.
Yes.
So I just want to let you know that it's not like our assessor is assessing it and then the state has to
Correct.
agree. It's
Yeah,
numbers.
the assessor is the Maine Revenue Service.
yes, exactly. That's what I was getting at there. The assessors and state revenue service, they'll provide that assessment. I was just wondering how much they'll be able to work hand in hand.
Well, at a bare minimum, which is something that already exists, is we know what the original assessed value would be as of April 1st, 2022. So we would be asking them to have a certificate signing that says, yes, that's what it is. I would also hope, to me, it's always good to have the discussion with the assessing authority on, well, what are we projecting or anticipating as the taxable value into the future? But you can do that, you don't have to have, they're not a necessary component of that. I would always say very helpful, but depending on the project or projects, you just have to work with what you think is the most reasonable taxable value projecting out into the future. Sometimes it's often dealing with the taxpayer or the developer to get a sense from them, what are you expecting for your capital expenditures, which again, don't necessarily translate dollar for dollar to taxable value, but you can have that dialogue to try to figure out what those estimates are. Those estimates are not binding on the assessing authority here at Maine Revenue Services. Again, you're giving your best guess projections based on your informed judgment on the nature of the project, CapEx going in, going forward.
So, in capturing this money, I guess the other thing is, how does it be dispersed? We'll have a number of projects that we can use, and how broad a use would those be? Are they just going to be specific to the geographic area, or how far afield can they go to benefit the whole county?
I think I would view it this way. So you would have, depending on how you define the geographic boundary of the TIF district, you certainly would be eligible projects inside that area. As I mentioned before, you can do potentially projects outside that area, but that have some relationship to it. Sometimes you see that with like utilities. And then you have community-wide. Community-wide is going to be UT for Somerset County. So this is what we talked about earlier. Community benefit dollars are a lot nicer because you can
Which
use
we
them.
don't have specifically in this project.
Right.
But if we can drum up some rational relationship, we can kind of get away with it. Is that-
Kind of where
Well, I'm not saying that, no.
That's why I was just wondering what the guardrails are, what are the guardrails, what are the parameters? What do we need to follow?
The challenge you have, I mean, just to kind of state it out loud, is, okay, if you're looking at the unorganized territory, and I'm generalizing, there's not a lot of development in the unorganized territory. comparatively. And you do have some county property as well that I suspect you might be able to do certain things with. But that's a challenge that you're just going to have to face. But nonetheless, what's typical, I think it's pretty typical in Somerset County, is when you have organized towns, on the fringe of those is often where you see more activity. From an economic development standpoint, doesn't mean it can't be further inland, I guess I'll call it, in the UT. But the amount of projects that you realistically are going to do in the interior is probably pretty low, is what I would speculate. I mean, I grew up in Aroostook County. I used to do forestry, so I'm pretty familiar with what's out there, which is not much. It's a working forest, of course, but most of the industrial activity, you can find remnants of it, sitting in the woods. An old train or old, logging camp, essentially what you see. But again, I would reemphasize that even though you're going to have, and I think you'd want to see on paper, here are those guardrails. But again, I'd come back to, you do have some flexibility, even on a year-to-year basis. Like it may not make sense to do 100% capture, particularly if you have a lot of new value, but it may make sense to capture a certain portion of that to fund some potential projects. You kind of have to, the only way to really gauge that, I would say, is take a look at something on paper. Obviously, it's based on information-informed judgment, but start to see what it might look like, and then you start to get a more concrete feel for, okay, this is something we might want to do, or, wow, this is, we're just going to have this, lower the rate and we'll get less money from the state.
So, do you happen to know if other towns in the county are tipping the same corridor where it goes through them?
I don't know specifically, myself. I don't.
Right, 'cause-
Others might.
Yeah.
Is there only, two towns, Starks and Caratunk, in the county? Is there others?
No, there's a couple.
Hanson?
Hanson benefits from
Anson has,
And then
Bingham?
Moscow.
okay.
Pleasant Ridge? There's a bunch of them.
And then Forest, West Forest was plantations.
Jackman?
Hanson.
How many of these this is your specialty in the firm, I assume?
Yep.
And how many of these things do you have on the stove at any one time?
It depends. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's a steady, usually it comes kind of waves, I'd say. So right now, I think, I'm going to say there's 3, maybe 4, depends. But sometimes folks they're wondering whether they want to pull the trigger or not. They're kind of in that early phase 1, I guess I'd call it. And other times, it's just, well, we don't really have a project coming in, and this is completely legitimate, but we are interested in trying to attract it. They were looking to, let's designate this district because we want to try to attract more economic activity. So it's not always driven by a specific taxpayer or a specific developer. Sometimes it's just community-driven. So, I don't think I've ever had more than 4 or 5 going at one time. Sometimes it's 0. It just kind of depends on, what folks are interested in doing. I'm trying to think, don't quote me on the stats because I don't know them completely, but there's probably, I think about half of the organized towns, or maybe at least 30% of them have utilized, they have TIF projects. There's a big database that has them all in there. Not surprisingly, a lot of them are service center communities or ones that would lend itself more to that. And that's simply because in more rural communities themselves that might be organized, they just might not have a lot of economic activity or a program they want to do, and they might just want to keep it that way, and that's okay. They'd rather see the tax rate come down, and that's perfectly legitimate, that's perfectly fine. I went through that with one community. They said, well, a TIF just doesn't, we wouldn't know what to spend the money on if we kept it, and they found it more valuable just to have for themselves. But they made the decision on an informed basis, from my perspective, and I it's their decision. But at least they had the numbers, they looked at the policy considerations, and I think, personally, I think they made the right decision, because that's what they wanted.
So just to expand on what John said, when we make the TIF district, are we able to include municipalities? Or is it only a UT district?
You're going to be looking at the unorganized
Okay,
territory.
just want to make sure, this is one of the regulations, guardrails that I want to consider as we're going.
Yeah, each town would have to make that decision for themselves.
Yep.
So just to expand a little bit on John Bottle's answer to John's question, we're part of a practice group called the Economic Development Government Relations Group, and it spans, there's 6 of us in the group. We tend to do environmental, land use, municipal, but this economic development practice has really developed because we really like supporting communities being able to build shelter, but also use the infrastructure component. We talked earlier about, in some projects, there's credit enhancement. There's a pretty clear understanding coming from the time that the project manager, Thorne Dickinson, had with individuals in the county, Somerset County, that this was going to be an infrastructure thing. So that presents real opportunities, I think, to build the infrastructure of the county. And as John says, because development patterns typically between the UT and the organized towns, meaning that the UT really values the environmental, the open space, the outdoors. There's components that make more sense for the UT than you might see in an organized municipality. In my practice, I had a chance to rub elbows with a guy named Mike Trainer, who did a lot of the bond practice in the state and did a few TIF practices, projects. And he said, the legislature has amended the TIF statute a number of times, and they've really changed the nature of it. This is closer to the original intent of the TIF program. When you're working with counties and municipalities on infrastructure TIFs, that was really the original purpose of the TIF statute. It's changed to give credit enhancement to companies. But again, our best understanding, and it was part of our conflict review process, was to make sure that we weren't bumping into the project partner. And so we do not think there's a credit enhancement component. This is infrastructure to work. So we love the practice. I'm originally from Caribou, which is the core of the county. John's from southern Aroostook. But we both have roots in the county. And I think what we know about growing up in counties in Maine is there's some things that you can do at the county level that can't be done at the municipal level. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you today. I did commit to John that I'd make sure, because he's got a couple of kids that have to be picked up at 5 in Bangor. So we got to adjourn by 4 o'clock. And yeah, we should answer any other questions you have, and we can give you back your meeting time. We didn't want to be disruptive to your meeting.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I would like to move ahead post haste on this, but I do have a question on this original letter, the engagement letter, and then in it is, what we don't have before us is the standard terms and conditions portion that is.
Yeah, I think we got those in the folder.
We may have those in a folder. We're happy to, if we
Yeah.
have them, leave them here, or we can obviously email them to take a look at.
So the question was, I
Right now.
didn't know how everybody was comfortable if it was, somebody made a motion to proceed with the.
They're not in the binder here, so, but we can certainly send those to Tim and have them distributed. They're pretty standard, but by all means, you should take a look at
Hence the
it.
title, standard.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
You won't be surprised when you see the standard term.
I didn't think I would be. They weren't here, and it was mentioned in the letter, so I thought I would bring it up as.
We'll get them to you post-haste. Meant to bring them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we meet every 2 weeks, so theoretically, I guess we try to make up our minds on this and vote on it at the next meeting. Is
At the next meeting, if you didn't have your minds made up already.
I want to look at it
Well,
more.
I always feel I should
Yeah.
have to 10 before.
I would suggest, I mean, digest it. I mean,
Yep.
me, I like to sleep on things anyway.
Yeah.
But, you know, take in the information. I mean, nothing monumental is going to happen in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so
hopefully not.
assuming we do pull the trigger on this, you've still got enough time if we,
That's,
Yeah, there's plenty of time, recognizing October's coming up, but, you know, October to February is a long time frame in my book.
Why does that? Ooh, it's been quite a roller coaster.
I think that 2-week timeframe makes sense, based upon the level of understanding in the room as to the basic program components. The understanding that, you know, John's going to be your guide, so if you have questions as the process rolls forward, it'll be helpful. But we will get you the standard terms and conditions, if not today, first thing tomorrow, so they allow them. And I just need to say this. I've been doing economic development work for a long time. And with Tim, he established quickly a strong reputation within a working group called the Forest Opportunity Roadmap. Essentially came from Susan Collins, Angus King's effort to say to the Secretary of Commerce at that time, Penny Pritzker, Secretary Pritzker, we got to help this region. There have been a lot of mill closures. We got to get them back. I love the niche that Sappi occupies. I love seeing Skowhegan and Westbrook thrive. I want to see that continue to happen. But there have been a lot of mill closures in Maine. And so they got large grants, not of just capital, but also resources. And the University of Maine has worked alongside a number of startup companies in the forest product sector. But Tim is one of the guys who regularly participated in the community effort, and I think it's a real coup for the county to have found this county administrator. Christian Savage, I gotta say, he has no quit in him. He just keeps plugging for businesses in Somerset County. And I've had the privilege of working with him on projects for 3 years, and it's just an extreme pleasure. He's one of the standouts in the county. I suppose he has a challenge because the current commissioner of DECD, Heather Johnson, used to work in Somerset County. So he's got a high bar, but I think there's a friendship and a respect level there between Heather and Christian that's befitting of all the work that Christian does. So I think you've got a dynamic duo here between Tim and Christian. And we really were attracted because of the opportunity to work with a good group of commissioners, but also an excellent staff. So just wanted to commend you for all the work you're doing.
And I'd say too, you know, in the next 2 weeks, if you have questions, need more information, let us know. Happy to furnish it, and by all means, take whatever time you think you need. Doesn't bother us a bit.
probably be best if we filter them through Tim and have Tim, that way it's just one.
Yeah, that's fine. Perfect.
You guys really have to leave? No. Did you say more things?
That's enough.
Yeah, you're worried about the small pet syndrome.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Workshop number 3 is to discuss the press release regarding the November ballot question.
So in your packets, I added some information in regards to maybe some strategies to promote this question. In part of that package was the information from the Secretary of State's office that has the 8 questions that are on the ballot. This is going to be an interesting turnout for a November election. You've got some people that are following the Pine Tree Power issue. I did confirm that our question regarding changing deeds from elected to appointed is going to be on the same sheet of paper. So it's not going to be a separate sheet of paper. That may not be a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to election clerks. They like to have one sheet of paper that they can run through their machine. So it's good that they're on the same sheet of paper. So we're after all 8 questions, 4 citizens initiative questions and 4 constitutional amendment. So there may be voter fatigue by the time they get to the bottom of that ballot. So it's probably worthy to promote this as best we can. So in your packets, I talked about some of the timelines. The ballots should be delivered to the town offices the week of October 2nd to the 6th. Absentee voting starts October 10th. So the 9th is holiday, so the 10th is when they'll be open for absentee voting. So if we were to do a press release to the paper, I would recommend it should be done that week, the week of the 9th or 10th of October as absentee voting starts. I also came up with a couple of other suggestions, utilizing the county's website for information, doing an email push, and maybe a social media video. And by that, I mean just recording a short 2 or 3 minute video explaining what the voters will see on the ballot. Try to do it as balanced as possible, so you're not trying to pound it into their heads, but just to make them aware that this is an opportunity and why the commission supports it. So that's my timeline, and as you saw there, I was given a draft and made some changes to it, and I did add some language in there that says in the third paragraph that the commissioners unanimously agree that the time is right for this change. So any thoughts or comments on that?
Any thoughts of possible pitfalls as far as individual commissioners promoting, or should it be a group?
I think, in my opinion, if every one of us has a sphere of influence, and every one of us likes to talk about elections and politics, right? So, especially at the dinner table. So, we all have a sphere of influence, so I don't see it as an issue if you were just to talk to your regular contacts about why you think this is important, and talk to the folks that you know who are traditionally going to go out and vote, as you may have the opportunity.
So there's nothing that, because it's a board decision to put this on the ballot, there's nothing out there that either prevents us or shies us away from individually promoting it.
I don't
That
think
you
so.
know of, okay.
And I think it's even better than that. I think it's because we're all, I think, in complete unanimity on this thing. Is that I think we should all be inspired to, because we can all speak for the entire board. That's sort of a good government measure, to our peeps that we know and can influence. And I know you know a lot of them, so I would encourage you to do so.
Different, well, yeah, just in different roles. Some of these certain things were either frowned upon or whatever.
Well, I think
Sometimes illegal.
Well, part of the issue is that it's a nonpartisan position we're talking about, so you're not taking away an R or a D and that sort of thing.
Any thought of a mailer? I know
Money.
that's uncommon, but
Money.
Expensive and,
my thought is that would be the way for us to promote it as a unanimous 5 that are in.
so we print 25,000 letters and you mail them?
It is expensive.
That's a lot of stamps to lick.
Wow. It was a
In
thought.
my
Been there, done
experience,
that.
in my experience, in this day and age, most mail goes in the trash or in the fire,
It does,
so,
but
yeah.
depends on how it's written and, if it's written in the form of a personal,
Sure,
or it's
sure,
a postcard, whatever.
yeah.
But
I think this is good, and I think we should just kind of keep an eye on it as the next 60 days, and we have more ideas to share with you as time goes on. Let's just,
So is the board okay with the language of the press release, if we were to do a press release in a few weeks?
I believe it was the second draft that we kind of.
Yeah, I think we all agreed on, yeah.
That.
Yeah.
But I also like John's idea of
Yeah, and it was incorporated,
it incorporated
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah.
so.
so.
So at the very least, we'll move forward with a press release, and I'll be in touch with all of the town clerks to let them know that it's on the ballot, because they're the ones on the front line that get questions to say, what is this? And so I want to inform the town clerks and the town managers that this will be coming.
I had one other teeny little editorial suggestion. On the reduced political influence paragraph, I
Yep.
think you should say, appointed registers of deeds, instead of saying might be less susceptible, just say are not susceptible to political pressures.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That was picky. Sorry.
Oh, that sounds good.
So thinking about how we could promote this is another thing that I think we've done in the past, not as commissioners, but for other different things, is to see how much it would cost to run an ad in the movie theater here in Skowhegan, because they run ads all the time.
But nobody goes to the movies, they all watch.
I haven't been to the movies in 45 years.
Last time I went, we were the only people there.
Last time I was in
Hey,
Skowhegan.
Sip, they're in color now.
There were
people in there.
25 cents when I went.
Well, I'm all for, you know, let's just think of ideas, maybe we can think of some things. I mean, we really want it to pass.
So did Gone with the Wind just come out? You went to the...
That was black and white, right?
I would think for the press release, if we could have that hit on October 8th, it's the Sunday, and that's the paper for the Morning Sentinel that everybody must buy to get the full digital.
Gotcha.
I would also say that because a large portion of Somerset County is delivered the Rolling Thunder Express, that we probably ought to have something.
Somerset Gazette.
Huh?
Somerset Gazette hits,
That's true, but I mean, there are towns.
There's an
in the
overlap
county
there,
that-
Yeah.
That overlap.
Palmyra.
Both, so.
St. Albans.
And I think, yeah,
My whole district is,
Rolling Thunder.
gets that paper.
Yeah. Rolling Thunder, 2-cent Times.
Ads in that paper.
Tim, Rolling Thunder, 2-cent Times.
Yep.
The Town Line, which hits Fairfield quite a bit. I think they even went to Norwalk with that. And what you said was the Somerset
Somerset Gazette,
Gazette.
is that what it's called?
And the Bangor Daily News, of course.
Those small papers are really always looking for content, so that should be
Yeah.
pretty easy.
Yeah, we don't want to over-egg the custard on this. because
Omelet, oregano.
I was wrong before it's thick.
We always have Facebook too.
We don't want to generate some huge I don't know. We'll have to just see. how much-
The custard is more vegan, so it incorporates everybody.
It's a big group picture.
I think we can come up with some more ideas, but
Yeah.
let's move on for now.
It was getting off.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fantastic.
New agenda items, commissioners only.
I'm all set.
Okay.
Everybody's good, okay.
Good.
Finance reporting.
Since reporting on August results, nothing really new so far in September. Still trending good. We trying for the rest of the year, things something drastic.
Okay, so,
Can't get people in position. And as a result of that, unfortunately, is we gotta have to be able to.
Glad to see you were all right too. I went by your house the other day and you was out in the middle of the field doing this.
Me?
Yeah, I turned around, went back, and I thought you wanted some help, and then I looked up, you were pulling a kite.
Yeah. I was doing kites during the windstorm Saturday. I wanted to fly kites. I'm thinking, well, you gotta tie the grandbaby down.
well, that's great. So that's it for finance, any questions? Thank you. Christian?
Very busy on the broadband front, and final reporting for some equipment through federal grant, prepping for our year-end reporting and year 2 budgets. And I don't take any more time than that.
Okay. Sheriff?
Patrol had 421 calls for service last week. We lost 2 deputies from resignation, one with the state police, one with Waterville. We have 2 applicants in the pool that we're working with right now, one that you're approving tonight. But the downside is they have no experience, so it's going to be a road to get them ready. Just to let you know that the legislature is gearing up. The Legislative Council has approved an initiative to allow joint standing committees to work on carryover bills. This is new ground, so to speak, so there's a lot going on legislatively.
And congratulations on the safe driving.
Yeah, we lost a truck last night The other ran into the side of
Figures. What happened? Say it again?
the- Deer ran into the side of the truck last night, so we lost the truck last night.
Boy, I think they were sent by a competing county.
We have collision? We have, do we?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Good.
Captain Pike?
Well, since I came off the road, I haven't wrecked a cruiser in about 3 years. Probably why we-
There's something.
That's why we won.
New things at the jail, I've re-implemented the mandatory pre-shift briefing effective October 1st. I thought it was imperative to jail operations that our folks become re-engaged with that. Been working along with the sheriff and Mr. Curtis on the Minuteman project, which is the camera and security system for the jail. They're telling us now they hope to get going on that in earnest in the next couple of weeks. And I have implemented weekly jail staff meetings to share different ideas and things going on inside the jail with my various area heads, or department heads within the jail. I think it'll help streamline communications and improve efficiency.
Thank you.
All I have.
Very good. David?
A few things here. One thing in Rockwood at the community center, we have a church that's renting the space to do services. They would like to mount a TV to the wall and donate it to the building. So I need your approval to see if you're okay with that. We have places we don't want it, so we will basically give them the area that we would be okay with them mounting it. But basically, that's up to the commissioners, so I brought that to you, and you can either approve in general, or we can put it on the next meeting if you need it that.
What's the wall made out of?
The walls, I believe, are stud and...
Drywall?
Yeah.
Why do they want a camera on the wall of the community
That's the
center?
camera?
TV.
Oh, a TV.
Okay.
So you can make sure they mount it on a stud, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Be happy. I'm gonna say, if they don't mount it to a stud, it's not gonna stay with it, but...
Exactly.
Do we need a formal vote on that, or can we just kind of indicate
I
our
think a
consensus?
general approval will do.
Love
Is
it.
that right, Tim?
Yep.
I think it's fine,
Easy
yeah.
repair one that gets
Consensus
moved.
is a go.
There you go.
If you need it, we'll put it on the next agenda for a formal, but
Okay. There were questions on the furnace for the Rockford Fire Station. There was a question on warranty. On the heat exchanger, it's 10 years. I have copies of the warranty for anybody that would like it. Company is NTI, if anyone's familiar with that, but I have the warranty. Bridge, haven't had any updates. Person I had looking at it hasn't responded to my emails. Not sure where we're going with that. Plowing snow up to Lake Moxie Road. I met with DOT with Liz Caruso in Caratunk. State's willing to provide us with a truck and a heated bay to keep it in, but they have no drivers. So we are trying to line up drivers to drive that plow truck. Haven't found anybody yet. In middle October, I think the 18th and 19th, there's training on those type of trucks. It's a patrol truck that they use in Fairfield. So we kind of have a deadline where we've got to find at least one driver, possibly a couple, and so we get them trained in the state type of truck. So that's where we are there.
What's that route?
We're got a little over 5 miles in Caratunk. That's the main loop around up to Pleasant Pond, which is a tricky road, and just a couple little side streets. And for us, it's Lake Moxie Road from 201 over to the Troutdale Road and Indian Pond Road. We have 3.17 miles of that, and we're capped on either end by the Forks Plantation. And the Forks Plantation is politically shut down right now, so they can't do anything. So they didn't even have anybody come to the meeting because they can't make any decisions until they have the town meeting and get things approved. There's a big political battle going on, it's been in many of the papers.
yeah.
So, 28.
But do we plow up to Pleasant Pond?
No.
This is
no,
Caratunk
our
is-
contractor, we had, our previous contractor had a contract with us and with Caratunk. They're separate contracts.
Okay.
But DOT wants everything combined. So it would be about 11 miles combined, And that, their truck will do those 11 miles if we can find the driver.
And we split that with Carrot Hunt?
Yes, yeah, expenses will be split 3 ways. Once the Forks is operating again, they'll be paying their share.
That sounds like,
Haven't talked about that with DOT yet. Either DOT will, since it's their truck and they're just leasing it to us, or it may be something we need to, either us, Caraton, or the Forks will have to take care of the insurance.
I would think that we would want to insure the license of the driver,
Yeah,
irrespective of the truck itself, so that it's all covered.
okay.
And can we put that out for advertisement?
We.
I think we should.
But given the time factor, when the snowstorm, they've got to be plowing right after the storm starts, people coming from away to do it is unlikely.
so what happens if we can't find a driver?
Then we
you rotate.
go back to DOT.
So I need one more.
They think they,
I thought that was the new administrator's job.
Oh, I'm retired, I can do it.
I mean, it's kind of the world we live in now. So
Yes.
does Carrot Hunt not have a snowplow man or woman?
They do not. The person that was doing it under the old contract doesn't have the necessary license to drive a tow
size
truck.
truck,
That
yeah.
requires, I think, a class 2, and he was plowing with a smaller, Ford F-450 or 550, I'm not sure which it was.
Okay.
But he doesn't have a license to drive the patrol truck, so.
Did he get the license by taking the course in Fairfield?
No, that's just to familiarize with the.
Oh, I see, okay.
But these modern trucks are computer controlled. If you want to drop your blade, you're pushing a button on your touch screen. There's no levers or anything, it's all computerized.
Ah,
So it's,
Well,
we're working on it anyway.
Class B.
probably gonna rain all winter anyway.
College education.
I've
okay.
got a couple more things here.
We were talking about this,
Walpole
too much
Dam Road is
certification.
going to be plowed this fall. That was in question due to all the rain we had this summer, but I was told that that's going to happen, so our section will be done too. And there are new applications, both on the community benefit and TIF, that we will need to address when we get either a new board for community benefit, or we reorganize and do what we're going to do with the TIF board. But we now have a couple that we've got to work on. That's it.
Thank you. Pavel?
On the website, they still are developing templates. So when they finish that, they're gonna migrate the data on the county website, so that's still in progress. We finalized yesterday, 9 Citrus project, so that was update all the servers for like remote connections with the outside to access the public safety application, so that was completed last night. And we working on like a few big projects like two-factor authentication, net motion, wireless, so, and of course, cybersecurity does daily tasks.
Questions or comments for Pavel? All set? Thank you. District Attorney?
Well, the Somerset DA's office decided to take a trip down memory lane this last week by having 2 people out with COVID. And one of them was Frank Griffin, who I think you all know he's the first assistant. He had a 21-count aggravated drug trafficking case starting on Tuesday. He wanted to come try it, even though he had COVID, and the court would not allow him in the courthouse. So the question was whether or not they would continue the case, and we didn't know if they would. And so what I wanted you to know is just how incredible it was to see people step up. Timothy Snyder, who has a gross sexual assault trial starting next week, said, that's fine, he can do the aggravated drug trafficking case this week and the sexual assault case the following week. And Mike Madigan, who lives in Brunswick, drove up because it's just, because of his years of experience, just wanting to put 2 attorneys to try to get familiar with just an insane amount of material. I mean, 12 of these counts were Class A's. So we just put a whole bunch of people on it. And what Michael wrote to me about Timothy was incredible, and Timothy lives right here in Pittsfield. But then when he went on to tell me about the Somerset office, you just have to hear these two sentences. He says, "As for the rest of the Somerset office, I am truly amazed. Everyone there stepped up as well. Exhibits were generated, passes obtained, notices made, and reminders given. And it all appeared as smooth and coordinated as if it was any normal day." And they really are. They're an extraordinary group. So I'm so impressed with them. Julia, who lives right here in Skowhegan, she had a jury trial last week, and she won her case. So that was exciting. And yeah, they're definitely working hard and getting some good results. So just wanted to let everyone know.
Thank you. And I don't think I missed anybody. HR?
Administrator.
And Tim, you've given your administrative report?
You've been listening to me talk, but I haven't given my report.
All right, well, I hear your report.
Skipped over your,
You were so overwhelmed by the kind words of Andy Hamilton about me.
Well, we knew that you were overwhelmed, so I was only kind of cool.
Get your wits about you again.
So just a couple things to highlight. I did attend the Maine County Commissioners Association working time, meeting some of my colleagues, and the breakout sessions were good, I thought. As was mentioned, I met with the sheriff and Captain Pike and Patrick to discuss our jail funding needs. I did send the information to Scott Ferguson as he requested. He's putting together information for the supplemental budget. Couple more things just to point out. The Spirit of America Awards that recognize volunteerism in communities. We traditionally do a recognition ceremony each year. This year, we've scheduled it a little bit earlier, so we're not in the winter months. So we're going to do that on October the 18th. So that's a Wednesday night after the commissioners' meeting. If anybody and everybody wants to stay, that'll be great. 6 p.m. up in the courtroom upstairs. And we've sent out the invitations, and Rochelle's been working on the certificates, and so we have at least 19 people to recognize throughout the county. So just put that on your calendar. Also, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I did put an example in your packets and on the desk of a format for a charter review. And so what I've done is I've kind of taken the first 2 pages of our charter and kind of added in where some of the language differs in the charters from Cumberland or Aroostook or Androscoggin or Knox. And so those are the only 5 counties, us included, that have charters in the state. So I just wanted to have you take a look at that, and maybe you can comment back to me later. Is this the format you would like to use in slowly going through our charter review? And if I may, Mike Smith is in a training, so he can't be here today, but he did want to submit his report, especially about the events pertaining to Saturday's storm. On Saturday, they received 292 calls for service. 117 of those were reports of trees and wires down. They lost power 3 times at the comm center and had difficulty with their generator. So the generator didn't come back. So there were, in case you ever hear from your constituents or firefighters or EMS folks, there were periods of about 45 minutes and then another period of an hour and a half where the comm center was down. They had to reroute all the 911 calls. The generator, as probably most of you know, was completed through RFP and ordered in January, but even in January, they told us it wouldn't be here till December. So that's the replacement of the current generator, which continues to give us fits. And so that was the situation on Saturday. Mike wanted to make sure you knew. So.
Thank you. Let's see, no unfinished business, new business. Resolution 23-192 to approve the memorandum of understanding between the District Attorney's Office and the Sheriff's Office in regard to the domestic violence investigator position.
So moved.
Second? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So, thank you. Discussion.
little bit of information more information on what this is all about, and I may have some comments related to this that I want to get clarified. So, if we could get a little bit of information, that would be great.
Megan, Sheriff, yeah.
So the domestic violence sexual assault investigator has always been in my office with supervision really provided by lawyers, and that's not best practice. It's best practice to have the supervision be from someone who is trained in law enforcement. And so this is what was written up in Kennebec, and I honestly just changed Kennebec to Somerset because we wanted to have that oversight in Kennebec as well. And so we've been talking about it, and the real reason for an MOU is just because we get along incredibly well, we'll work well together, I see no concerns. But you should have something in writing for just in case there's ever a complication in the future. And so that was the reason for putting something in writing that formally has the sheriff giving oversight for a position that never had that before. But yeah, that's
So-
something I welcome.
So this is new?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes. It's still the same, the position always existed, but what's new about it is having the sheriff provide oversight of the position. And we didn't have that before, and the position will be in the union, and,
We follow the union rules and follow them to the FOP.
So this will become a union position.
Exactly.
So this is what we were talking about last time we met, which is, so you're kind of moving this position under the sort of aegis of the.
Yeah, so you're right.
Sheriff's office.
Under the umbrella of the sheriff's office, though, the assignment is to the district attorney's office. So they kind of have two bosses. They're going to get direction from the DA to work on domestic violence and those other special investigations. The supervision part of it, the position falls under the sheriff's office.
and I'll still pay for the position. So it doesn't increase his line. The money still comes out of my line like it always has, but I think this is a good.
Okay, not to be difficult here, but, so we had some discussion about whether this person might be available on short notice to fill some other task that's not ordinarily associated with,
So if that was the case, I mean, if you're a deputy sheriff, you're a deputy sheriff. I would hope that those would be anomalies.
but so he is a deputy sheriff, or she is? Okay. Which is sort of different than it used to be. It was sort of a-
So before, it was a district attorney investigator, I just think of how it was from their authority.
Well, yes, actually, that's true, but, yeah, Mike certainly knows a lot about it, but the
Yeah, Mike was
Attorney
one.
General gives them statewide arrest power.
And I was duly sworn as a deputy for the sheriff, so.
We did that so that there'd be less complication.
Yeah.
This is,
And
this
I
makes
think
it
you did a
strange.
lot of overtime. for the-
I did, I worked a lot of patrol shifts outside of my normal scope of being the DA investigator.
Okay, sounds good.
And it doesn't directly relate to this probably, but in terms of applicants and review of that and screening for this individual, where this is gonna fall under the sheriff as supervision, I believe he should be directly involved in the application process and screening and hiring, along with we as the commissioners, because it is county money, so.
Yeah, so as DA Maloney already articulated, we get along really well. And I don't, there's not going to be any problem with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the MOU helps going forward,
Yes.
should
Put something-
one or both of you advance to greener grasses and better
Go
pay.
out to pasture.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say above the grass.
Above the grass, yes,
That's where I'm headed.
yes.
Below the grass.
No.
But wasn't there a problem with, I don't know who it was, and I'm not mentioning any names, but you had somebody in this position was not, kind of not really doing their job very well, and.
I mean, I wouldn't discuss that in a public meeting,
Yeah.
but what I can say is that it's I've learned that it's really helpful to have law enforcement to give guidance and feedback in a regular way.
Yeah.
And it's good to have a person, to have law enforcement colleagues as well.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, this position can be fairly isolating.
Right. Okay, very good.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Quick
Go.
question before you go on, not really a question, maybe a point of order. I think we could do 23,193 through 23,200 all at once, all based on the fact that they're resignation and or hiring.
Right, but we need to finish this piece first. After we finish this piece.
We voted on, we took the vote already.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't hear it.
Everybody was in favor. So you can make that motion.
I'd make a motion that we do 23,193 through 23,200.
And I think your motion is that we take favorable action on these?
On all of these at once, yes.
Okay. Second.
Okay, vote. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay. Bringing us to Resolution 23-201, to recognize the outstanding efforts of Somerset County employees in receiving first place in the MCCA Risk Pool Safe Driving Awards.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Applause?
Are we included in this as commissioners? Do they check our driving?
So, well, no, some people we flag that to
Yeah.
make sure it don't get counted. But this really, obviously, the sheriff's office is involved in this, but this really is any county employee that's on the road for county business.
Right.
That falls under the risk pool.
Right.
And so, and again, this was based on data from 2022. So the deer and all that stuff will be on next year, so.
Primarily, that's
Here's the.
So you're not included in this one?
deputies and the sheriff's department and.
Well, I think we put the most miles on the road.
Right.
Dave has a car, it goes to UT, there's other the corrections officers transporting inmates, there's others, but I think we do a good job.
I just want to mention that I think it's great that we recognize this in a resolution, but that maybe something should be done a little bit
Beyond?
more
Yeah.
and beyond that for that recognition. So I would propose that maybe some type of,
And we've got $3,000 to do it with.
no. I'm just saying, that's a huge thing for the size of the county, the amount of drivers we have in the sheriff's department. So I don't think this seems a little bit
That put it over the top, right?
under-congratulatory to me.
We can take everybody to the movies.
Yeah.
Dancing people.
Only if it's going with the wind and it's 25 cents.
That's what your proposal, Scott, take us all to.
Just a suggestion, that's all.
Yeah, you're gonna take us all.
All right. Any other further discussion? All in favor? How could you not be? Capital reserve expenditures, none, organized territory, warrants, resolution 23-202, to approve the treasurer's warrant for general funds, Somerset County Jail and unorganized territory, for a total of $550,916.64.
So,
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
gotta pay, but you gotta.
Okay, miscellaneous discussion items, commissioners only. Joel?
I got 3 pages.
I have nothing.
Okay. John? Scott? Nothing?
Good.
I think, very good. No executive sessions, motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay. All in favor may leave. All opposed may stay. And don't forget to sign our warrants.
Is that right?
But,
You get a spike one and a cross one.
It's a small, it's like this with another little piece on it.
Tim?
No, I get two of them up here like that.
With Tim?
Yeah.
Patrick, I have a really stupid question. I didn't want to raise it in an open meeting.
I wonder if it was the same stupid question I had.
Trying to get a feeling.
So, let's say you have a large piece of property in the unorganized
Rather wait
territories,
for another meeting.
and it's worth X amount of dollars. And somebody's gonna build something on it that's gonna make it go up in value $1 million. And we don't tip it.
Yeah.
How do we-
Already, and.
The state assesses the money, they get the taxes, and they give us some of that to spend it any way we want to.
I would say, yeah, we
Right.
could probably make a draft of the application.
Actually, doesn't it come as a lower tax rate though? We actually,
Makes a lower mill rate. A lower mill rate if basically the tax amount that they're collecting stays the same.
But what I don't understand is,
If you're looking just for.
If they increase their budget by $1 million, you get $1 million more
Yeah, I think-
revenue or whatever. It's gonna stay the same. It's not gonna
right,
lower the
except for we have physical cash to do something with as opposed to a savings.
but that's what
Is that right?
that's my stupid question. I mean,
That's the exact same stupid question I had.
what is the difference? What happens if we,
What
what
happens
is
to the
the,
money if you don't capture it?
if we don't tip it, don't we get it anyway?
No.
We don't get anything?
You have to realize, what you need to look at is control.
Yeah.
You tip things, you have control.
Okay, but putting aside the control issue, what happens to the money if we don't tip it?
The state.
But they give us some of it, don't we get it?
We get some of it as we budget for it.
Right, but they don't take all the tax dollars that unorganized territory people pay in.
And give it all to
And
us.
give back to the county.
They give us a
They give you a portion, and they keep.
Okay, with the portion that they give us, we're not limited to spending that in the UT. We can spend that anywhere. That just goes in the general fund.
The portion that you get back
Yeah.
is just part of the nominal UT budget. If your UT budget stays the same, you don't get any of it.
We basically,
But
we have three budgets. There's a UT budget, we have the general budget, and then we have the jail budget, because the jail budget has a cap to it. So essentially, there are three
So you can't
budgets.
spend that money.
let's say, Elon Musk comes in and puts this rocket center that's worth billions of dollars, and we don't tip it.
Then the taxpayers will get the benefit. The county.
Statewide.
Yeah, statewide, but the county per se budget is not gonna see anything. Because Dave's gonna come up with what he needs for spending. And they're gonna ask the state to basically fund it.
Well, let's say Dave came up, and I'm so stupid, I apologize. Let's say Dave came up and said, boy, it's been a good year. We don't need to spend a nickel in the unorganized territories this year. Zero. We have a budget of zero. Does that mean all that assessed taxes in the UT, just, we don't ever see it? Because we don't need it?
Well, the taxpayers will eventually see it.
How do they see it?
If, there's three different components, I think, to the county, if you're a taxpayer in the county. You got our portion, which is the public service portion, you got the state portion, and then there's another portion, there's three different portions that add up to get
I guess I should.
tax liability for Somerset County. And then they take the valuation for that. and develop the mill rate.
I don't understand I know
So basically what happens is if the mill rate is lower than the individual property tax owner, let's say that their property is valued at 100 grand, they're actually gonna pay less in property tax because the mill rate is either lower or stays the same, doesn't go up. Whereas if we tip it,
So I told you.
the tax could go up, I guess, the mill rate would stay the same or go up.
Right.
Right, so here's actually a good question.
Why was it?
It was actually the exact same thing I had going. Can any of this money be invested in a way that we receive interest to basically continue, to stretch it out even more.
Why does
See what I'm saying? Like in the private sector, you would invest in bonds or something like that, and then you would work off of the interest and keep the principal, or use some of the principal and then all the interest, and then it just gets
The
more.
county is,
Tax revenue.
per se, from the county's general fund, you have to purchase, invest in things that are like rated A or.
Yeah, they have a criteria, a certain high-quality stock.
Right, but then they have to be not risky and so on. So when it comes to CHIP, I don't know what the investment requirements are for CHIP projects on the, what,
Right.
We're getting over, I'd say close to 6%. Checking.
Right.
It's very hard to find a CD.
Right.
Unless you go.
And it's not tied up, right, you don't have it locked up.
Right, it's not locked
Right.
up. So currently, I don't see the value of the county investment. Even if.
As long as you're gonna sit in the checking account, that's the thing, is if, so in this TIF situation, I see that, right, is, let's say it's $1 million, and we put it into the checking account, and you're collecting at this point in time, you're collecting 6%. Because what I'm feeling like right now with this free money, I mean, and I don't like it, it almost feels like we're obligated to spend it, even if it's in stupid.
Well, yeah, well, that's why we have that's why we have a committee, to screen in.
Why is it you want to
Well-
go this way to the normal, just?
Yeah,